Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Critical Perspectives. I'm Pirella Isabel with my host Vanessa Beely, and we, of course, are here once again to talk more deeply about a lot of the headlines and sensationalist tweets or whatever X posts that you see. And I really want to focus on that aspect too. I think both Vanessa and I are kind of sick of seeing how journalism has turned into just posting sensationalist headlines on X. There's very little discussion about veracity. There's very little source checking. And apart from all of that, of course, the things being discussed right now, obviously the Epstein files and what that has pretty much exposed for a lot of people. But again, you know, Pops and I were covering the Epstein files, and we were called conspiracy theorists like 8 years ago. And a lot of these things that have come out also, in the sense, are things that many of us in independent media knew, like the affiliations between Epstein and Mossad were pretty obvious for a long time, and the characteristics, the very dark pedophilic sex trafficking behavior of these powerful people, all of that has been known. But the worst part out of all of this, and I think we'll discuss that, is nobody's going to be held accountable. None of these powerful people are going to jail, and everything that's released from the establishment is released in what they want people to see. So they're not going to expose themselves if they don't have the upper hand. And so people really have to think about what this also has been is a distraction from a lot of the geopolitical and international foreign affairs that are happening right now in the background of the focus on the Epstein files, very much implicating many of the same players that are mentioned. And of course, Vanessa and I have long been also talking about this age of this age of normalization, where it does seem like more importance is given to making transactional negotiations over any sort of ideological or unified type of relationship. And we're seeing, of course, we've been seeing the very few bastions of actual resistance, actual revolutionary thought be attacked endlessly. We've seen it with Venezuela, we've seen it with now Cuba, and of course we are seeing it with Iran as well, and various factions of the resistance axis. And in also going along the same lines as that, we're seeing this play out in a way that I think is still, from a lot of people, this hope that the great powers of Russia and China are going to save everybody, and it's going to be this very, very simplistic bad guy versus good guys. Oh, China and Russia are the good guys, Americans and Britain and the EU are the bad guys, and this is exactly how it is. And that's the extent of the analysis. And I have less and less patience for this, and I've been seeing it just really on steroids now. And I think we're going to debunk a lot of this, for lack of a better term, but more so just talk about what's actually behind a lot of these headlines. Are these things that are being said, like China completely banning Israel from their economic relationship? Are these things real, or are these things just merely wishful thinking, wishful hopes for many people who basically have just turned media into some sort of just like just puddle of nonsense? And I don't want to sound like pedantic or just like poo-pooing everybody, but like, yeah, there's just a lot of this. And I guess the last thing I will mention, kind of going back towards the Epstein thing, is this Western-centric idolatry of very milquetoast liberal pundits and intellectuals like Chomsky, where it just re-emphasizes how selfish. Most Americans are, particularly the, New York intellectual, like usually Jewish or, liberal, like contingent of these intellectuals that grow up and worshipped Chomsky, how they're so out of touch with why people from the global majority that are not US centric have always had problems with Chomsky and have always thought of him as a suspect. So that therein lies just another aspect of all this. Vanessa, just, I want to start off with you and what's been going on your side of the spectrum in terms of what is actually happening and versus what you're hearing from a lot of these X posts on sensationalist headlines.
Yeah, I mean, where to start with that? That's a lot to unpack there. Yeah, I mean, what is kind of interesting, I've actually noticed a bigger presence of what I call Chinese commentators on YouTube. Now, whether they were already there, but suddenly they're coming very much to prominence. Like when I go to YouTube and my feed, I suddenly have 3 or 4 videos from these commentators that I've never really kind of come across before. And when I listen to them, it's very much pushing, the de-dollarization, everything that is picked up in the West as being China good and US bad, right? So that's number one. But number two is, we're saying, social media is just becoming this kind of clickbait arena, which is very frustrating when you're trying to actually open up the debate, open up the discussion to a much wider lens. And then suddenly everything gets kind of myopically back down again because someone has shared an article which was I'm talking about one particular case. It was an article in Middle East Monitor. Actually, the only source I could find was on Facebook and it was in Urdu. Right, but Middle East Monitor picked up this this story just as things were escalating between the US and Iran, and effectively it was talking. The way it was presenting in the headline was there was a brand new agreement, trilateral agreement between Russia, China, and Iran. And I was like, okay, and this was getting shared across the board on social media. And I read the article and I was like, but this is exactly the same strategic partnerships that we've been talking about. It even says quite clearly there is no mutual defense pact. So anyway, I started reaching out to various Iranian journalists and media, and I was looking on Iranian media for something confirming this. And then someone came back to me, and basically, I think it was a journalist at the IRIB, the state media, basically, in Iran, and he said, no, this is it's just the same agreement. There's absolutely no difference. But what was kind of interesting and what came out of that discussion, and I remember you and I were having a bit of a sort of to and fro about it, talking about how this was sort of just getting spectacularly spread as if this was going to save the day, because now there was this new agreement when it wasn't a new agreement and it still didn't have a mutual defense clause in it. And this came after, of course, stories that, multiple Chinese planes had landed in Tehran, again, something that was debunked predominantly by Iranian commentators and analysts. But coming back to this one, of course, it's covering Russia and China. Right. And what I discovered just through having this conversation about the existing agreement and why there isn't a mutual defense clause is that apparently Iran actually didn't want the mutual defense clause. And there's 2 possible reasons. One, I think, is very clear, is a definite reason, is that Russia actually wanted Iran to come to the help of Russia in Ukraine. And Iran was like, no, this isn't our war. So they withdrew the mutual defense pact. But of course, they've been supplying drones to Russia that have been used in Ukraine. And then the other aspect of it, of course, is the fact that, again, this is through discussion with Iranian analysts and journalists. There's also the aspect, of course, Russia's relationship with Israel. But not only that, the historical reneging on arms deal by Russia concerning Iran. Like back in, I think, 2010 to 2015, Iran had actually paid for S-300s to come from Russia to Iran. And it was George W. Bush that stepped in and basically said to Putin, don't supply the S-300. So Russia was put under pressure by the United States and the international community at this point. And they capitulated. Now, Iran had to take them to, I think it was the ICC, the International Criminal Court, because they paid for these S-300s. Now, it's really interesting how it kind of unraveled from this clickbait post into an actual discussion. So maybe I'm shooting myself in the foot, because maybe it is quite good to have all this clickbait stuff, because then we do actually have to dig deeper, and people do actually, come up with more information on the subject. But to a degree, though, we shouldn't have to. I mean, this information should just come out naturally, but then it's constantly getting decelerated by people's attention being turned into a completely other direction, and also then going, oh, it's okay, because Russia and China are going to come to the rescue of Iran, and there isn't going to be World War III, and we're all okay, right? So that for me was kind of an interesting exercise into digging in and finding out what is really going on. And there were a number of other posts, usually put out by the same accounts, usually open source intelligence accounts that I don't trust on social media anyway, most of them. And they were putting out information about the military buildup, and I think a few of them were saying, that's it, the attack's going to be tomorrow, and so on. So it also creates this environment of alarmism, right? Which again distracts from the real discussion of what's going on, because then everyone also reaches this kind of peak attention, and then suddenly it gets deflated because Iran says, no, we'll come back to the negotiation track. Because I think Trump was also getting wobbly about the potential for attacks on US bases in the region. If they did launch an all-out attack on Iran, then obviously they were going to suffer. They probably weren't well prepared enough. The Pentagon's excuse is that they didn't have sufficient air defense in Middle Eastern countries, not in Israel, because of course Israel has received pretty much every layer of air defense that exists. And now we're back to negotiations. But of course, what happens? Trump says, no, I'm pulling out of negotiations because they're not going to come to the Iranians are not going to come to Istanbul. They didn't agree to a multilateral discussion, including some of the Arab Gulf states, including Qatar and Turkey and so on. They refused. They said, no, there should be a bilateral discussion. It should have a nuclear focus, nothing else. We're not going to discuss, missile development or any of the other subjects that were being presented by the United States and the conglomerate of Arab Gulf states, which was to be human rights abuses during the recent riots, which is just hilarious, really. Well, not even hilarious. It's tragic when you consider the rioters, backed by the CIA and Mossad, effectively killed more than 3,000 Iranians, many of whom were security forces and Basij, police forces, but also passers-by, children in their cars with their parents. They burned ambulances, hospitals, schools, and so on. And yet here is Iran supposed to come to this meeting and actually present a case for why it committed human rights abuses, right? So we're now back on track, apparently. And tomorrow there are supposed to be negotiations back in Oman, and they will be bilateral discussions. But the thing is, and many Iranian analysts, again, have said this, like, why are we going back into the negotiation track? Yes, there can be an argument that it's to buy time, could be. But ultimately, negotiation or concessions are never anything but a trap as far as the US is concerned. And we've talked about this many times, even with regards to Russia and Ukraine or Gaza. It doesn't really matter. They're never honest discussions. So somewhere down the line, I guess we're going to go back to escalation, or my fear is it's going to happen like last time. They go for negotiations and Israel strikes or US strikes into Iran. I don't know. It's very difficult to read the situation. The military are putting out much stronger statements. The IRGC and the Iranian military are putting out much stronger statements than Pezeshkian, which is to be expected to a huge degree. Yeah. And actually, he's come under a lot of criticism, Pezeshkian, on social media from fairly prominent Iranian analysts. So sorry, that's my focus on this region. But
yeah. Well, I just want to
also that brings in Chomsky. Because anyway, just I think talk about your perspective on Chomsky from before the revelations that, of course, he defended Epstein. He was a very close buddy of Epstein for many years. And even after Epstein was effectively convicted, he was still offering him advice on to how to deal with it, rather than completely withdrawing from any contact with him.
On the Iran thing, before I get into Chomsky, I just wanted to kind of piggyback on that. A lot of people thought that Iran was going to respond on Saturday, and that didn't happen. And then we've seen statements from the foreign ministry and from the president. And for a lot of people, I think it was a shock and a disappointment from a lot of people who are just watching this, kind of in a theatrical sense, like as a spectacle. But it's really not surprising, I think, to see the differences between the military and the resistance versus the presidency. And I've talked about that also being a thing. Like, a lot of people don't understand, like there is a difference that's rather clear. And I just but I think overall it does seem like the people support a very resistance-minded aspect when it comes to Iran. It's hard to say because, in general, no nation is really a monolith. But from what I'm seeing is there is more of a drive to push back, and a lot of people, at least in the U.S., that are against what the United States is doing, what Donald Trump is doing, the way they are attacking Tehran, they were like hoping that Iran would pummel Israel, that they would pummel the U.S. based on the fact of how this administration has been extremely just going after everybody one by one, and it was clear that Iran was the next target. So I guess my question to you is it how do you see the support for Iran in these terms? A lot of people have been sensationalizing this as a potential World War III scenario for like the 9th millionth time, but I do see Iran not necessarily being the way that we perceive it in the United States, like the same aggressive nature that Donald Trump comes in bulldozing. That's not how Tehran acts, and that's not how I think people are lacking in understanding, I guess, as to how things are working. They're confused as to why there's, the president and then the resistance aspect. Where do you see that going?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I was talking to, again, another Iranian analyst the other day, and I actually asked him, how successful are these operations being in Iran? Because obviously what they're trying to do is to create the economic drag down through sanctions and through blockade and through isolation to a large degree. Because although Russia and China is Iran's biggest customer for its oil, and now it's buying heavy crude oil at discounted prices to replace the Venezuelan oil. So trade-wise, they're very important, right? But at the same time, those countries that are benefiting from buying resources from Iran are buying at discounted prices because of the sanctions imposed upon them by the US, because it's not free trade. Like, they know that there isn't another option other than Russia and China. So again, I want to take out this kind of altruistic savior aspect to this that some people usually apply to these equations, right? Because they don't exist. China is benefiting from trade with a weakened Iran, and so is Russia. And Russia is also trying to obviously get a foot in or further into the door of Iran's nuclear advancement. Russia, of course, historically actually having been against nuclear weapons being developed by Iran. Go back to the 2001 released conversations between Putin and George W. Bush, and you'll see very clearly that Putin is very much against Iran having nuclear weapons. Historically, Russia and Iran have had a pretty turbulent relationship throughout history, right? And Russia, post Second World War, actually occupied territory in northern Iran. So there is a history of differences of opinion, let's say. But of course, what Russia appears to be trying to do is to basically say, well, we'll come in as a mediator. You know, Russia kind of loves playing this role. It did this very much in Syria also. It tried to do it in various other arenas. And it wants to come in as mediator. It's basically offering to Iran, look, we'll take the excess stocks of uranium into Russia. To a degree, yes, this can be helpful, just as they did in 2013 with Syria, when they said, we'll destroy all of Syria's chemical weapons resources. They effectively destroyed Syria's strongest deterrence against Israel and the West. And I have an uneasy feeling there's an aspect of that here also with Iran. And I think certain people in Iran also would be very cautious of it, which is why so far as I know, they haven't taken up that offer. I mean, Maria Zakharova reiterated it today, I think, in her press briefing, saying, you know, this plan has always been on the table and it's still there and we're still open to doing it. But effectively, it gives Russia and various organizations in Russia, like Rosatom, for example, it gives them a foot in the door and control over Iran's nuclear production. And when you come back to the idea of, you know, should Iran have pummeled the US? Should Iran have pummeled Israel? You're talking the two, or let's say the major military power in the world today, which is a nuclear state, and then its kind of military base in the region, without getting into the Zionist movement versus Israel, but the US military base in the region, which is effectively nuclear weaponized also, right? Then you've got the entire region at risk here, because if Iran were to fall, if Iran were to be stabilized to the extent of Syria or even of Lebanon, then the rest of the region is just prey to whatever the US and Israel wants to do. And Israel's already destroying southern Lebanon. Yesterday it was spraying, basically Roundup on all of the crops and farmland in southern Lebanon. So the destruction of southern Lebanon is ongoing. Syria is plunged into turmoil. Iraq resistance is threatened by the release of ISIS in Syria. And so it goes on. So if Iran is weakened to a point where it's unable to hold back the hegemon of Israel and US, the whole region will be destroyed. So that's how high a risk this war is. I mean, forget about the kind of nuclear and all of this. It's just the destruction of West Asia, basically, and the complete destruction of any kind of resistance capability also. So the stakes are enormously high. One thing that came out of the riots is that the sectarian card is not going to work in Iran, because basically people became very aware very quickly that this was a CIA, Mossad, MI6 operation. They could see that the rioters were, although they were Iranian, they were drugged up. They had professional weapons. The Kurdistan Workers' Party came in from Iraq, so they entered the border. They crossed the border, so this was cross-border operations, right? So that card isn't going to work. The 12-day war demonstrated to what extent Iran could defend itself and attack, even after the first 24 hours when it had suffered the assassination of many of its high command and even its scientists and so on, right? So to a degree, Trump has boxed himself into a corner. And I do wonder if there is a connection, as many people are saying, that when he looked as if he was going to back off, then suddenly all the Epstein files were released. Israel clearly, to a huge extent, is putting pressure on the US. And I'd like to get your take on that, whether you think there's an element of blackmail being used against Trump by Israel, by the Zionist movement, to basically finish the job with Iran.
Yeah, I've heard that. It's an interesting theory. It's very well possible. I think there is most definitely an agreement that Donald Trump is not going to be the leader again, that he's done in terms of the MAGA movement. He's not going to go back and continue his attempt at being the face anymore. He's tainted. Whether it's only the Epstein stuff, I wouldn't say that's only that. It's pretty much everything that he has done and not done. Like, he took a while to release these Epstein files, and now that they're released, it's a lot of like random stuff. It's a lot of unimportant things too. It seems like what they're releasing is extremely controlled. They have a lot of redacted information that the public doesn't get to see. And so I think a huge part of that is his failure to deliver. The other issue is ICE. As you know, probably the Trump administration recalled 700 ICE agents to leave Minneapolis. So instead of escalating there, they kind of walked it back. They also told the military to stand down. The military was getting ready to deploy to Minnesota, and the military has also been told to stand down. So that wasn't a good incident for him, because as I said in like a few other interviews, this was a turning point for, I think, a lot of people in the US, where they finally saw the connection of like, this isn't just about immigrants. This never maybe was about immigrants. This is about, kind of crushing any sort of civil rights that many of these people so eloquently always believed they had, whether it was the First, Second, Third, Fourth Amendment. And so that, for a lot of Trump's base, was a red line, because he was supposed to be the free speech, anti-censorship guy, and all he's brought in is more surveillance. And we know that Palantir directly acts as the background, the functionary for the ICE agents app that they use to hunt down people that are not just like undocumented, but also US citizens. So coupled with all of that going on in the background, then you suddenly have this release of the Epstein files that confirms, oh, breaking news, Epstein was Mossad. It's like, yeah, Of course, Ghislaine Maxwell, the daughter of like an infamous Mossad agent. Like what? Of course, but this is just confirming a lot of things. And like I said, it's riddled with a lot of like useless things, like random videos and
Yeah.
conspiracies about these videos. And so it kind of muddies the waters because you're trying to find like the important things in all of this. And what comes out of it then it is like it's not like Donald Trump is going to go to prison. It's not like the Clintons. By the way, Hillary is now going to testify on this. It's not like they're going to go to prison. It's not like they're going to be held accountable. It's not like we're going to know who Epstein's
Mm.
clients, beyond the few that have gone public, are, or how deep this goes. Bill Gates was named multiple times and
Yeah.
he's denying it. None of these people are going to see jail time. That's
Mm.
not justice. It's simply a bone that is being thrown at the
Yeah.
people. And but Donald Trump is no longer hailed as the guy by MAGA to the degree that he was. And I think we're seeing the Democratic Party exploit this situation as if they're the good
Mm.
guys, even though they're also clearly involved. And they're putting their sights on several people, including Kamala Harris, which is a losing battle. But there's Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, who was
Mm.
terrible when it came to COVID, a hypocrite, absolutely hated by many people, but he would be the antithetical to Trump. And I think that's what they're doing. They're basically signaling that we're going to transition into the Democratic government soon. And this is going to go away. Donald Trump is going to go away. He's going to go live his life playing golf in Florida, and that's it. And I just don't. I think Donald Trump has already done much of what they wanted him to do at this point.
Yeah.
He pretty much continued what Biden was doing, laid it out, got his base, who was more anti-establishment than the left at that point, to basically swallow surveillance, to bootlick the state when they were supposedly against it, to completely avoid the topic of Davos, of their guy being at Davos, and to completely just
Yeah.
backtrack on a lot of stuff. Like, so now that's complete. Once all of that goes and they've taken Venezuela's oil, at the very least, they have a open door to now begin that process. And they have gone after Iran. They're going after Cuba. They're really bullying their way through the world right now, especially through Latin America.
Mm.
And they are overseeing the Trump peace plan in Gaza. That's basically going to issue, of course, a prison for another prison. This time, a more, I would say, surveillance and a type of just technocratic
Yeah.
also prison for the people of Gaza, and they're going to make a huge profit because Jared Kushner is going to be involved. And so what he has succeeded in what the deep state wants. And so he's played his role, and when people play their role and they're done, they just move on. And I think perhaps Israel has been pushing him, but ultimately Trump has been a huge Zionist supporter. His whole
Yeah.
administration is full of Zionists, so I don't even think he needs to be um, pushed
Encouraged.
to act in favor, of Israel.
And
I think he willingly has done it and will continue to do it, whether he's president or not. That's just the reality of the Trump family clan. So in terms of that, that's where I sit on that. But I think a lot of this Epstein stuff has been a huge distraction, and a lot of like, it really exposes how US centric people in Washington expect the world to be, like how they still view themselves as the most important existing entity in the entire world, that everybody should be looking at this stuff. And one of the issues I have is with there is no really anti-imperialist sector that's powerful or that's actually building something within the United States. but they feel like they are. They act like they are. And when Noam Chomsky was named as exposed to say in many of these emails, and some of the most recent ones that have gone out, where he is saying to Epstein, I'm so sorry for how you're being treated. I advise you to just ignore it. I've been in situations like this, where they accuse me of this and that. And he kind of even played into the whole being Jewish thing and how that's caused him problems. And it was just very odd, because the latest email was in 2019, after
Yeah.
Jeffrey Epstein had been a convicted pedophile, after
Yeah.
everything was pretty much exposed. And yet you still have people defending him as being a beacon of leftward thinking intellectualism, that he, stood with Palestinian people, that he spoke in favor of Hezbollah. By the way, he was against the BDS movement. He was never
Yeah,
for it.
exactly.
And he gave a lot of lip service, and this happens now. And his meteoric rise in the world of political politicos and pundits and intellectuals that get to speak really reminds me of a lot of what we're seeing now. His voice got elevated to the point where he was a New York Times best-selling author. He went to MIT, which is
Exactly.
a
Yeah.
notorious university for intelligence. I mean, he was coming from the establishment, and he didn't face the repercussions that other non-establishment, actual, revolutionary type of characters throughout living the same time that he has faced, like Michael Parenti among them, who
Yeah.
was just completely pushed aside. And that reminds me, Vanessa, of a lot of the way here, and it's interesting because a lot of the same people defending him. Their voices are often pushed to the front. Their voices are often heard,
Mm.
and others aren't. And the thing is, it's always the people that, like Chomsky, they seem to challenge the order, but it's done safely and with always a back
Yeah.
door to backpedal or stay on the fence of some issue. And one of the major issues that I recently saw that he spoke on, it wasn't recent, it was from a while ago, it was Libya. But he
Yeah.
called Gaddafi a brutal dictator, and he said,
Mm.
but the United States wants someone that is more easily controllable. And he spoke about it as a matter of fact, like, yes, the United States obviously is interfering in Libya, but Gaddafi is a brutal dictator. How many times have I heard the same thing coming from major popular influencers and voicers? Assad
About
is a brutal
Syria.
dictator,
Yeah.
but it's the same thing. And I feel like we will have lots of Noam Chomskys. We already do,
Yeah. Yeah.
different
Yeah.
replicas of that. And it really just reminded me of that. And the defense of someone like him is really a self-reflection, regardless of his anti-revolutionary stances, which were many. And I think some people don't even know
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
them, but
Yeah.
it was many. The fact that you add the Epstein affiliation, and not just affiliation, a very close BFF friendship with
Exactly.
a pedophile, how do you justify that
And even
morally?
after he's convicted, like it's not even, you can't even cut him some slack and say, well, he ended the friendship after the conviction. No, as you said, the letter, the most recent email or letter was 2019.
Yeah, yeah. I just don't, I see it reflective as a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a lack of consistency, because I also say, if this guy was a Republican, because this is coming from now the left in the
Yeah.
U.S. If it was a Republican, if it was a right winger that like a Trump figure, they would have condemned it. But because it's this old man intellectual who opened the eyes for many people. I mean, nobody's telling you not to read his books. Like, you should read all the books. The books of evil men are actually really great. great books to read, because you can see the way
Yeah.
they process things and the way they think. So of course, read Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent, which is the one book that everybody mentions. But like other than that, that doesn't mean that you have to make, I don't know, all of these excuses for this guy just because he was an intellectual. And I feel like there is a blind spot with a lot of people who come from academia. And this is not an attack on them per se, but it's like kind of, there's an out of touch kind of nature
Yeah.
where people just don't look at these figures like you do. And I made the point to connect this to how people from outside of the US have never looked at Chomsky as some sort of revolutionary figure
Yeah.
whatsoever.
Yeah. That's one point that I really want to make here. I mean, yes, he supported regime change in Syria. He thought everyone who was unvaccinated should be put in gulags, effectively, right?
Yeah.
He's pro-regime change in Iran and always has been. He claimed there's no serious torture at Guantanamo. There are multiple aspects of his work that would raise huge alarms. But even people who apparently are supporting the resistance in this region are putting out the videos of him from 2006 when he met with Hezbollah and he met with Syed Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah. He met with Hamas. I know also he went to Syria and he met various high-level people there. But at this point, like, everyone was coming. Vijay Prashad came, and he's another one that was pro-regime change in Syria, etc., etc. But the fact is, he was banned in, I think it was 2008, right? So he was banned almost immediately after, because the majority of those people that he visited within the resistance realized he's a Zionist. So he was banned, but nobody's actually including that in their argument. They're all just putting out these videos without due diligence by checking, oh, but did he maintain good relations with the resistance? No. He was banned because they recognized that he was an infiltrator. And this is classic infiltration also. Send the Western academic to come in and appear to support your cause, to speak well about you, and so on. And then boom, guess what? What information does he take away with him that enables future operations or enables better understanding of factors of the resistance that weren't available to the enemy before? I mean, this is textbook. And the fact that people that supposedly support the resistance are not figuring this one out is kind of worrying to me. As you said, that means there isn't really a true revolutionary left, because any true revolutionary left would have figured that out, like Michael Parenti. It would become incredibly obvious that that was what was happening. And it's the fact that he was banned and the fact that these accounts are just putting out this information and people are scratching their heads and going, well, yeah, he did. He was on the side of the resistance. No, he was banned like 2 years later.
I think
it's a lack of context, it's frustrating, to be honest.
Yeah, and well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think a lot of people don't know exactly that he was banned. There's no really, I haven't seen any Twitter thread really highlighting very much that he was banned, and that's always a go-to, thing, and that, oh no, he was for Palestinians. He was the most milquetoast, doing the basic thing and getting a lot of accolades for doing it. And that's what I see also happen today. People doing the most basic thing and getting the most accolades because they're a Westerner that somehow happens to say they support the Palestinian cause and all this stuff. And like, I think this is a problem with particularly the left, and particularly also a lot of movements that are coming from that, where they don't differentiate between potential intelligence assets. Right now, I see, for example, many questioning um, a lot more what's coming from Cy Hirsch than they were before. But like, it's almost like it's almost like it takes them a while to figure it out. When a lot of this is, as you said, textbook um, intelligence, and it's interesting, his book being titled "Manufacturing Consent" because there was a lot of manufacturing consent coming from him.
Yeah,
And again, the intelligence apparatus always, they will never elevate the voice of somebody that's an actual threat to power. They will crush it. They will drive people out. I mean, Cynthia McKinney was driven out of Congress, out of the
exactly.
country for challenging power. Most people like are completely censored or completely pushed for challenging power. How are you going to, put faith in this? And an MIT professor intellectual who had a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, and so it's kind of like not even, it goes beyond Epstein. It also goes to this idea of consistency. If we're gonna, look at everybody, and it's not like we're asking for perfection or we're looking at things black and white, especially here coming from us. I mean, I do think people are complex and they have faults, and there's not, a perfect individual. I don't think that's what we're espousing. But the reality is, if we're going to normalize this idea of pedophilia, this idea of sex trafficking, this
Yeah.
idea of powerful people blackmailing other powerful people to, do this or that, and all of that. Like, if we're going to normalize that as being justified because you wrote a book and you're some very smart academic,
Yeah,
then
there's something very
where's the
wrong.
line drawn? Like, where do we draw the next line?
Mm.
And it's very also US centric to even have this discussion, which is, but I guess I wanted to tie it to that, to the fact that outside of that circle that Chomsky influence, and it's many podcasters and many people who like worship the ground he walked on. Outside of that, he, if you look at it from a non-US centric lens, he was never somebody that any sort of resistance movement trusted or looked at for influence. And my whole thing is just get out of your little circle of self-jerking intellectualism and go to the ground. I'm not an anti-intellectual like at all, but
Mhm.
I see that it has been a sort of like arrogant type of veneer for a lot of people, um,
Mm.
from actually really, seeing what is actually happening in much of the world, and how others don't necessarily share the view of your perspective, like that you expect that they would, and they don't have to, and you're not entitled to that. I guess so there's a sense of entitlement here coming from that.
Yeah, there is, and there's also, like as you said, I think what gets me is the lack of consistency. You can't argue one thing and then suddenly be almost defending something which is indefensible. You can't.
Yeah,
As you said, how can you defend a relationship with a known pedophile, and not only a pedophile? I mean, some of the information which is coming out, which has now, of course, been disappeared again. But it's absolutely clear that it went far beyond just pedophilia. I mean, you're talking
yeah,
torture, rape, I mean, just unbelievable, killing people, burying them. Yeah, I mean, it's a network
yeah,
that is just so dark that you should immediately be repulsed by it. That should be your immediate reaction, not how can I defend this guy because he was involved in it. Right? And we don't know to what extent
yeah,
Chomsky was involved in it. How can you know this guy for this length of time and not understand what he's doing? Right? It's nearly impossible. And so there isn't any smoking gun evidence that Chomsky had any relationship with him other than this friendship. But still, I would raise the question, you've known him for X number of years, you're still defending him after he's convicted for the crimes that he committed against children. And it's not underage sex, as Mahatma Osman said the other day. It's not. It's rape. Like, stop calling it underage sex. Even that terminology is kind of normalizing this.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's rape of children.
I guess, yeah. Well, yeah, that's putting it rather bluntly, and as it should be. But you know, a lot of this that's been going on with Epstein has also kind of clouded a lot of things going on in the background. One of the things I know has been going on is Russia and the United States continuing their negotiations, continuing their
Yeah.
talks, and pretty much going along what we've been saying is continuing to try to find a solution that I think they've already found. Personally, I think they've already made a decision to end the Ukraine war, and I think everything else is just kind of like biding time. And so that's one aspect of the normalization that I see. And simultaneously, apart from what we've seen with Iran, we're also seeing the US try to normalize relations with Venezuela. Donald Trump has said his conversations with Delcy Rodriguez have been really good. He's reopened the American companies, oil companies, being able to work in Venezuela, these permits. And Venezuela also has done a kind of restructuring of positions, and a lot of things have been said about Venezuela. A lot of things are being put out there as real information that isn't necessarily verified by Venezuela. So you have to be careful. I see a lot of people making statements like there was one statement about Alex Saab that was not confirmed nor incompletely shut down by several sources in Venezuela. But again, like there's that back and forth, and it does remind me of the time in Syria where a lot of things were being said and then other things were contradicting what was being said. And so, you know, I do want to mention Venezuela because it's kind of like they don't really have another position to take. If their aim is to get Nicolas Maduro and Sila Flores back, then, you know, they're doing everything they can. The Chavistas are empowered, but they're unable to get this oil to Cuba. And we know we've talked about this, you know, if that happens and they're basically, it makes it impossible for them to get this oil to Cuba. Cuba's in a very vulnerable position. Mexico simultaneously has sent humanitarian aid, but it's been questioned as to how much oil that's going to involve. And there's kind of been a back and forth as to from Claudia Sheinbaum that yes, we're going to send the oil, or no, we're going to discuss that with the United States. And then, of course, most recently, there's been the discussion with Donald Trump that he's saying that they are open to discussions with Cuba and they feel like they could reach an agreement. And Miguel Diaz-Canel gave a speech saying that, you know, they're not going to be forced by any sort of terrorist attempts to destabilize the country. But at the same time, there's also been talk about one of the Castro relatives replacing Diaz-Canel in a potential shift of power in reopening, because he was always a lot less revolutionary than any of the ones right in power right now. And there's talk about that possibility, and I just look at this as, you know, very dark. And unfortunately, I have a hard time, as we said earlier, seeing anything good come out of negotiations with the United States. Once a country opens up to the US pretty much does everything to get its tentacles in and resource extract and control the mechanisms of the operations. And, you know, the issue is none of these countries really have a choice at this point to fight the US alone, right? And again, this is what's happening. So where are China and Russia? They're not going to get involved, right? And they're not going to get involved. And I think people are saying, well, now it's shifted to, oh, they're going to help them, to, well, they can't because, why would
What are
they
they
do
going to
that? Is
do?
it?
What are they going to do? I mean, I think it's Chevron and Vitol, which is very heavily connected to Israel, that are now embedding themselves in the oil industry. Vitol is certainly responsible for the sales. And I don't know. For me, I think we're heading more and more towards kind of spheres of influence. This idea that Russia and China, well, Russia especially, is not going to, it didn't do anything to protect Venezuela. And interestingly, of course, it pushed the same narrative that Venezuela didn't defend itself and so on, which now, of course, we know is nonsense now that the information has come to light, just as it is doing so in Syria, right? And so that leaves China, but China isn't going to send war vessels to protect Venezuela oil deliveries by ship to Cuba. I mean, if people actually think that's going to happen, it's kind of insane to me, because that would kick off a war, because it's literally in the US's, it's in Trump's backyard. And one can argue, yeah, well, Trump is eyeing up Taiwan and that's in China's backyard. But actually, in my opinion, this is all going to shake out with spheres of influence, and China, Russia, US running those spheres of influence, competing on some level, as we've talked before, right?
Yeah.
But you're not going to see Russia and China. I mean, you're hearing these kind of very strong, as usual, rhetorical statements from Russia and from China, most recently from China today, but it's just rhetoric. They're talking about their strong relation with Cuba, et cetera, et cetera. But honestly, they're not going to do anything. I hope they do. I still, there is still a sliver of hope, and no one would be happier than me if China does send a couple of warships to help Venezuela transport oil to Cuba or Mexico, or it doesn't matter, in defense of Cuba. But I just think that's kind of extremely, extremely unlikely.
So for me, it's kind of like, and we've seen these statements come. TASS reported that the Russian deputy foreign minister met with the Cuban ambassador to Moscow. And so they said, we have unwavering support, unwavering solidarity for Cuba in the face of unprecedented blah, 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 blah. And it's like, but for me, it's like, well, what does that mean then? What does unwavering support and solidarity mean at this point, then, if it's not any actionable thing? So what does that translate to? Maybe it does translate to something, but I have a hard time as you believing that it will translate into any action. What I think it just translates to is diplomacy. Okay, well, we'll talk to Washington for you. We'll see what kind of deal you can make. You're going to have to concede this or that, but we will talk on your behalf. But it's ultimately, what in my view, what it seems to be happening is that Russia and China are kind of being used as a means to go to these countries that are in very vulnerable positions and talk them into some sort of concession with Washington. And I find that odd if you believe that we live in this world where China and Russia are taking on the hegemonic West. It doesn't fit into that, because if they were taking on the hegemonic West, then they would actually have some sort of bloc. BRICS isn't that. BRICS is an economic bloc. And whenever I point this out to people, and I just had a conversation on a show where I was, and it was like, yeah, but the multipolar world means de-dollarization, and this is a long-term thing. It's not like a short-term thing. And I'm like, but what does that mean? What do you mean? What does that look like for, does that mean that the countries that have been experiencing recaptures of their sovereignty, their land, and experiencing now neocolonialism are going to get maybe just more players neo-colonizing them. Like, so now it's not going to be the United
Basically.
States. Now China's going to be there and Russia's going to be there and take a role. Is that what we're looking forward to? Do you consider that a multipolar win? Like, because yeah, okay, like it's good that these countries have kind of diversified the power structure. I'll give you that. Okay, at least it's not just here. Now it's like, here, but what does that mean for the overwhelming majority of people in these countries? It doesn't mean jack shit, in my opinion, because even in Russia, you have an economy that has been completely shaken by the war domestically. I mean, I don't focus on that, but it has been in the inflation aspect, the price of goods as a regular person going to the grocery store have gone up. The interest rates have gone up. People are affected by it, even if on a global level the ruble is doing well. Who sees the benefit of that? And then when it comes to, for example, China, the people of China are doing pretty well. But what exactly is going on in terms of China's foreign policy? Because we're also hearing that China has now ousted Israel from its I guess having transactions with Israel. That it's completely just destroyed Israel by stopping its what I would call, I guess, its investment. But
Yeah.
but the reality is, has it really done
No.
that? Because I don't see any evidence neither from the Chinese government itself, nor anything detailed beyond Israeli media, which was Ynet who released that, and it's
Originated.
everywhere.
Yeah.
In
I know, but this
social
is
media.
we're back to this point. Nobody actually does any checking on the stories that they're spreading, and this is basically a headline saying China ends all investment in Israel. Well, that's nonsense. Like, if China were ever going to end all investment in Israel, why didn't it do it when the genocide against Palestinians intensified on October the 7th, a genocide that had been ongoing for 100 years? Of course they haven't. One, we know, and we've reported on this, that they're running investment through backdoor channels to actually be able to increase their investment. And that's actually to counter Israeli objection to Chinese investment because of US's dislike of Chinese investment. So they're working together to overcome the the obstacles. What this is actually about, it's effectively a private lawsuit between a kibbutz versus a Chinese fund agency, Ballet Vision. And it's over 11 million. And the statement in the law case from the Chinese fund agency is saying, but we shouldn't be investing because China said that this was a dangerous market, a high risk market back in 2023. Yeah, they did maybe make a statement about not investing, but what's happened since then? They've increased investment in Haifa port, in supplying labor and equipment to the settlement programs in the West Bank. They're supplying materials to Israel that Israel is using to target Palestinians in Gaza and kill them. So the investment hasn't dropped off. China is still investing. So this is my point. These misleading clickbait headlines that are just dropped into social media, and then they just are picked up by the bigger accounts, by the probably compromised accounts that are being paid by China or by Russia or whoever, and they're then just getting completely spectacularly promulgated onto social media. Whereas you, me, and people that are actually trying to do our job with due diligence just go further and further down the shadow ban list, so that our information countering it gets seen so much later. And by then, I'm still getting people telling me, yeah, but China sent all those planes to Tehran, or China did X, Y, Z. And I'm like, no, they didn't. Like, please, we have to stop this misinformation. It's insane. And when you actually read the small print of the post, or not the post, because people on social media are picking out what they want to pick out, and they're pushing that. But if you actually read the original article, it's not saying what you're being told on social media.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, we've come full circle to this because we're back to. I wish China did that. I wish.
Yeah.
You know, like if why wouldn't we want China to do that? Of course, we would want China to do that. And the issue is the accuracy of what's being put out there is just false. Creates false hope. Creates this false sense of savior type of mentality that just isn't there. And I think people are just going to be very lost when trying to analyze anything if they think that it's as simple as the United States is there's de-dollarization happening and China's rising and the yuan is going to trade well. Like, okay, again, what does that mean in a real sense? I'm not diminishing the economics of it, but I am saying translate that to what does it mean for the majority of the world. What do you mean that China has stopped investments here? Did they actually do that, or are you just talking about one particular case? And is this whole economic transaction still going on? Right? It's really looking at things more deeply than just like a surface headline that is, of course, going to get a lot of clicks because people seek that. They seek something good in all of this darkness, or they seek something interesting or dramatic happening in all of this. And we've become kind of a society that responds to these extreme highs and extreme lows. It's and like everything else just gets blurred out, but reality exists in everything else, exists in everything that you're not seeing. And I hate it because it's very manipulative. And there are forces out there that I think manipulate people into taking on certain narratives and to sticking with certain echo chambers and narratives. And I think as things progress, we need to be even more vigilant about that because it almost makes me feel like nothing is real. Like it almost makes me feel like a lot of this is actually theatrical. Like we're all being played. And I get to the point where I'm like thinking like, are China and the United States like just cooperating to manipulate like people against each other, because you do have like the very far right in the US anti-China people that think, they want to go to war with China because they think it's so evil and it's going to take us down. And then you have the people that are like, China is an angel and a saint and they don't do anything wrong and we should all worship China. And Putin also is Saint Putin. And, it's just like, it's kind of like this, there's no where like medium people are like, yeah, this is actually what's going on. These are the diplomatic relationships. These are the economic relationships, transactions going on. Because it's not popular to do so, and it's reflective of YouTube. It's reflective of X and whatever other platforms. And I'm really kind of finding it just hard to like have the patience to deal with it. It's kind of becoming like it's like you need like a vacation to just get away from that and then come back and deal with it again the next thing. That happens.
I mean, people are still telling me, even though we debunked that about a week ago about the strategic partnership thing, and I'm still getting people giving me the link to the one article that talked about it. It's just, that's the problem. As I said, it gathers traction so fast, and then you're always kind of limping up behind trying to say, no, hold on, guys, like really this, no, it's not. There's a much more kind of nuanced view of this. That's the problem. And social media is designed, obviously, to prevent any kind of nuanced or really informed debate coming to the surface. That's the whole point of it. And unfortunately, that's gathering speed now. It's accelerating massively as, you know, everywhere you look in the world right now, there's conflict or loss or destruction of some kind, whether it's economic, whether it's what we're seeing in Gaza, which is just complete obliteration of an entire people, basically, you know, and yeah, anyway, we'll be here for another 2 hours if I get onto that.
Yeah, and it never stopped. The obliteration of the people of Gaza has not stopped, you know. So people just turned away the attention from that. And that was the whole point of that whole debacle, the whole ceasefire deal. And anyway, yeah, we will be here forever. Vanessa, you know, and everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of us being Debbie Downers and shaking people. Well, I don't think we're Debbie Downers. I think we're no, and I ultimately at the end of all of this, I still have a realistic sense of optimism that people will eventually get it. It's just the pace is quite slow, and like I said, I don't want to come back to Earth. No, after this, and I think we made that decision as well. So I don't know. I guess you have us in this lifetime only. But we will come back with another episode of Critical Perspectives.
Yeah, we will.
And next time, and yeah,
while we're still in this life.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks so much for watching. See you later.
Yeah, thanks for watching. Bye.